Chapter 98 of The Way We Live Now. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 98. Marie Melmotte's Fate. In the meantime, Marie Melmotte was living with Madame Melmotte in their lodgings up at Hampstead, and was taking quite a new look out into the world. Fisker had become her devoted servant, not with that old-fashioned service which meant making love, but with perhaps a truer devotion to her material interests. He had ascertained on her behalf that she was the undoubted owner of the money which her father had made over to her on his first arrival in England, and she also had made herself mistress of that fact with equal precision. It would have astonished those who had known her 6 months since, could they now have seen how excellent a woman of business she had become, and how capable she was of making the fullest use of Mr. Fisker's services. In doing him justice, it must be owned that he kept nothing back from her of that which he learned, probably feeling that he might best achieve success in his present project by such honesty, feeling also, no doubt, the girl's own strength in discovering truth and falsehood. "She's her father's own daughter," he said one day to Croll in Abchurch Lane. For Croll, though he had left Melmotte's employment when he found that his name had been forged, had now returned to the service of the daughter in some undefined position, and had been engaged to go with her and Madame Melmotte to New York. "Ah, yes," said Croll, "but bigger. He was passionate, and did lose his head, and was blowed up vid bigness." Whereupon Croll made an action as though he were a frog swelling himself to the dimensions of an ox. "He bursted himself, Mr. Fisker. He was a great man, but the greater he grew he was always less and less wise. He ate so much that he became too fat to see to eat his victuals." It was thus that Herr Croll analyzed the character of his late master. "But Mademoiselle, she is different. She will never eat too much, but will see to eat always." Thus, too, he analyzed the character of his young mistress. At first things did not arrange themselves pleasantly between Madame Melmotte and Marie. The reader will perhaps remember that they were in no way connected by blood. Madame Melmotte was not Marie's mother, nor in the eye of the law could Marie claim Melmotte as her father. She was alone in the world, absolutely without a relation, not knowing even what had been her mother's name, not even knowing what was her father's true name, as in the various biographies of the great man which were, as a matter of course, published within a fortnight of his death, various accounts were given as to his birth, parentage, and early history. The general opinion seemed to be that his father had been a noted coiner in New York, an Irishman of the name of Melmotte, and in one memoir the probability of the descent was argued from Melmotte's skill in forgery. But Marie, though she was thus isolated, and now altogether separated from the lords and duchesses who a few weeks since had been interested in her career, was the undoubted owner of the money, a fact which was beyond the comprehension of Madame Melmotte. She could understand, and was delighted to understand, that a very large sum of money had been saved from the wreck, and that she might therefore look forward to prosperous tranquillity for the rest of her life. Though she never acknowledged so much to herself, she soon learned to regard the removal of her husband as the end of her troubles. But she could not comprehend why Marie should claim all the money as her own. She declared herself to be quite willing to divide the spoil, and suggested such an arrangement both to Marie and to Croll. Of Fisker she was afraid, thinking that the iniquity of giving all the money to Marie originated with him, in order that he might obtain it by marrying the girl. Croll, who understood it all perfectly, told her the story a dozen times, but quite in vain. She made a timid suggestion of employing a lawyer on her own behalf, and was only deterred from doing so by Marie's ready assent to such an arrangement. Marie's equally ready surrender of any right she might have to a portion of the jewels which had been saved had perhaps some effect in softening the elder lady's heart. She thus was in possession of a treasure of her own, though a treasure small in comparison with that of the younger woman. And the younger woman had promised that in the event of her marriage she would be liberal. It was distinctly understood that they were both to go to New York under Mr. Fisker's guidance as soon as things should be sufficiently settled to allow of their departure, and Madame Melmotte was told about the middle of August that their places had been taken for the 3rd of September. But nothing more was told her. She did not as yet know whether Marie was to go out free or as the affianced bride of Hamilton Fisker, and she felt herself injured by being left so much in the dark. She herself was inimical to Fisker, regarding him as a dark, designing man who would ultimately swallow up all that her husband had left behind him, and trusted herself entirely to Kroll, who was personally attentive to her. Fisker was, of course, going on to San Francisco. Marie also had talked of crossing the American continent. But Madame Melmotte was disposed to think that for her, with her jewels, and such share of the money as Marie might be induced to give her, New York would be the most fitting residence. Why should she drag herself across the continent to California? Herr Kroll had declared his purpose of remaining in New York. Then it occurred to the lady that as Melmotte was a name which might be too well known in New York, and which it therefore might be wise to change, Kroll would do as well as any other. She and Herr Kroll had known each other for a great many years, and were, she thought, of about the same age. Kroll had some money saved. She had, at any rate, her jewels, and Kroll would probably be able to get some portion of all that money, which ought to be hers, if his affairs were made to be identical with her own. So she smiled upon Kroll and whispered to him, and when she had given Kroll 2 glasses of curaçao, which comforter she kept in her own hands, as safeguarded almost as the jewels, then Kroll understood her. But it was essential that she should know what Marie intended to do. Marie was anything but communicative, and certainly was not in any way submissive. "My dear," she said one day, asking the question in French without any preface or apology, "are you going to be married to Mr. Fisker?" "What makes you ask that?" "It is so important I should know. Where am I to live? What am I to do? What money shall I have? Who will be a friend to me? A woman ought to know. You will marry Fisker if you like him. Why cannot you tell me?" "Because I do not know. When I know I will tell you. If you go on asking me till to-morrow morning I can say no more." And this was true. She did not know. It certainly was not Fisker's fault that she should still be in the dark as to her own destiny, for he had asked her often enough, and had pressed his suit with all his eloquence. But Marie had now been wooed so often that she felt the importance of the step which was suggested to her. The romance of the thing was with her a good deal worn, and the material view of matrimony had also been damaged in her sight. She had fallen in love with Sir Felix Carbury, and had assured herself over and over again that she worshipped the very ground on which he stood. But she had taught herself this business of falling in love as a lesson rather than felt it. After her father's first attempts to marry her to this and that suitor because of her wealth, attempts which she had hardly opposed amidst the consternation and glitter of the world to which she was suddenly introduced, she had learned from novels that it would be right that she should be in love, and she had chosen Sir Felix as her idol. The reader knows what had been the end of that episode in her life. She certainly was not now in love with Sir Felix Carbury. Then she had, as it were, relapsed into the hands of Lord Nidderdale, one of her early suitors, and had felt that as love was not to prevail, and as it would be well that she should marry some one, he might probably be as good as any other, and certainly better than many others. She had almost learned to like Lord Nidderdale, and to believe that he liked her, when the tragedy came. Lord Nidderdale had been very good-natured, but he had deserted her at last. She had never allowed herself to be angry with him for a moment. It had been a matter of course that he should do so. Her fortune was still large, but not so large as the sum named in the bargain made, and it was moreover weighted with her father's blood. From the moment of her father's death she had never dreamed that he would marry her. Why should he? Her thoughts in reference to Sir Felix were bitter enough, but as against Nidderdale they were not at all bitter. Should she ever meet him again she would shake hands with him and smile, if not pleasantly, as she thought of the things which were past, at any rate with good humour. But all this had not made her much in love with matrimony generally. She had over £100,000 of her own, and feeling conscious of her own power in regard to her own money, knowing that she could do as she pleased with her wealth, she began to look out into life seriously. What could she do with her money, and in what way would she shape her life, should she determine to remain her own mistress? Were she to refuse Fisker, how should she begin? He would then be banished, and her only remaining friends, the only persons whose names she would even know in her own country, would be her father's widow and Herr Croll. She already began to see Madame Melmotte's purport in reference to Croll, and could not reconcile herself to the idea of opening an establishment with them on a scale commensurate with her fortune. Nor could she settle in her own mind any pleasant position for herself as a single woman living alone in perfect independence. She had opinions of women's rights, especially in regard to money, and she entertained also a vague notion that in America a young woman would not need support so essentially as in England. Nevertheless, the idea of a fine house for herself in Boston or Philadelphia, for in that case she would have to avoid New York as the chosen residence of Madame Melmotte, did not recommend itself to her. As to Fisker himself, she certainly liked him. He was not beautiful like Felix Carbury, nor had he the easy good humour of Lord Nidderdale. She had seen enough of English gentlemen to know that Fisker was very unlike them, but she had not seen enough of English gentlemen to make Fisker distasteful to her. He told her that he had a big house at San Francisco, and she certainly desired to live in a big house. He represented himself to be a thriving man, and she calculated that he certainly would not be here in London arranging her father's affairs were he not possessed of commercial importance. She had contrived to learn that in the United States a married woman has greater power over her own money than in England, and this information acted strongly in Fisker's favour. On consideration of the whole subject, she was inclined to think that she would do better in the world as Mrs. Fisker than as Marie Melmotte, if she could see her way clearly in the matter of her own money. "I have got excellent berths," Fisker said to her one morning at Hampstead. At these interviews, which were devoted first to business and then to love, Madame Melmotte was never allowed to be present. "I am to be alone?" "Oh yes. There is a cabin for Madame Melmotte and the maid, and a cabin for you. Everything will be comfortable. And there is another lady going, Mrs. Hurtle, whom I think you will like." "Has she a husband?" "Not going with us," said Mr. Fisker evasively. "But she has one?" "Well, yes, but you had better not mention him. He is not exactly all that a husband should be." Did she not come over here to marry some one else? For Marie, in the days of her sweet intimacy with Sir Felix Carbury, had heard something of Mrs. Hurtle's story. "There is a story, and I dare say I shall tell you all about it some day. But you may be sure I should not ask you to associate with any one you ought not to know." "Oh, I can take care of myself." "No doubt, Miss Melmotte, no doubt. I feel that quite strongly. But what I meant to observe was this, that I certainly should not introduce a lady whom I aspire to make my own lady to any lady whom a lady oughtn't to know. I hope I make myself understood, Miss Melmotte." "Oh, quite. And perhaps I may go on to say that if I could go on board that ship as your accepted lover, I could do a deal more to make you comfortable, particularly when you land, than just as a mere friend, Miss Melmotte. You can't doubt my heart." "I don't see why I shouldn't. Gentlemen's hearts are things very much to be doubted as far as I've seen 'em. I don't think many of 'em have 'em at all." "Miss Melmotte, you do not know the glorious West. Your past experiences have been drawn from this effete and stone-cold country in which passion is no longer allowed to sway. On those golden shores which the Pacific washes, man is still true and woman is still tender." "Perhaps I'd better wait and see, Mr. Fisker." But this was not Mr. Fisker's view of the case. There might be other men desirous of being true on those golden shores. "And then," said he, pleading his cause not without skill, "the laws regulating woman's property there are just the reverse of those which the greediness of man has established here. The wife there can claim her share of her husband's property, but hers is exclusively her own. America is certainly the country for women, and especially California." "Ah, I shall find out all about it, I suppose, when I've been there a few months." "But you would enter San Francisco, Miss Melmotte, under much better auspices, if I may be allowed to say so, as a married lady, or as a lady just going to be married. Ain't single ladies much thought of in California?" "It isn't that. Come, Miss Melmotte, you know what I mean." "Yes, I do." "Let us go in for life together. We've both done uncommon well. I'm spending $30,000 a year, at that rate, in my own house. You'll see it all. If we put them both together, what's yours and what's mine, we can put our foot out as far as about any one there, I guess. I don't know that I care about putting my foot out. I've seen something of that already, Mr. Fisker. You shouldn't put your foot out farther than you can draw it in again. You needn't fear me as to that, Miss Melmotte. I shouldn't be able to touch a dollar of your money. It would be such a triumph to go into Francisco as man and wife. I shouldn't think of being married till I had been there a while and looked about me. And seen the house? Well, there's something in that. The house is all there, I can tell you. I'm not a bit afraid but what you'll like the house. But if we were engaged, I could do everything for you. Where would you be, going into San Francisco all alone? Oh, Miss Melmotte, I do admire you so much." I doubt whether this last assurance had much efficacy, but the arguments with which it was introduced did prevail to a certain extent. "I'll tell you how it must be, then," she said. "How shall it be?" And as he asked the question, he jumped up and put his arm round her waist. "Not like that, Mr. Fisker," she said, withdrawing herself. "It shall be in this way. You may consider yourself engaged to me." "I'm the happiest man on this continent," he said, forgetting in his ecstasy that he was not in the United States. "But if I find when I get to Francisco anything to induce me to change my mind, I shall change it. I like you very well, but I'm not going to take a leap in the dark, and I'm not going to marry a pig in a poke." "There you're quite right," he said, "quite right." "You may give it out on board the ship that we're engaged, and I'll tell Madame Melmotte the same. She and Kroll don't mean going any farther than New York. We needn't break our hearts about that, need we?" "It don't much signify." "Well, I'll go on with Mrs. Hurtle if she'll have me." "Too much delighted she'll be." "And she shall be told we're engaged." "My darling!" "But if I don't like it when I get to Frisco, as you call it, all the ropes in California shan't make me do it." "Well, yes, you may give me a kiss, I suppose, now, if you care about it." And so, or rather so far, Mr. Fisker and Marie Melmotte became engaged to each other as man and wife. After that, Mr. Fisker's remaining business in England went very smoothly with him. It was understood up at Hampstead that he was engaged to Marie Melmotte, and it soon came to be understood also that Madame Melmotte was to be married to Herr Kroll. No doubt the father of the one lady and the husband of the other had died so recently as to make these arrangements subject to certain censorious objections. But there was a feeling that Melmotte had been so unlike other men, both in his life and in his death, that they who had been concerned with him were not to be weighed by ordinary scales. Nor did it much matter, for the persons concerned took their departure soon after the arrangement was made, and Hampstead knew them no more. On the 3rd of September, Madame Melmotte, Marie, Mrs. Hurtle, Hamilton K. Fisker, and Herr Kroll left Liverpool for New York, and the three ladies were determined that they never would revisit a country of which their reminiscences certainly were not happy. The writer of the present chronicle may so far look forward, carrying his reader with him, as to declare that Marie Melmotte did become Mrs. Fisker very soon after her arrival at San Francisco. End of chapter 98. Chapter 99 of The Way We Live Now. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 99. Lady Carbury and Mr. Brown. When Sir Felix Carbury declared to his friends at the Beargarden that he intended to devote the next few months of his life to foreign travel, and that it was his purpose to take with him a Protestant divine, as was much the habit with young men of rank and fortune some years since, he was not altogether lying. There was indeed a sounder basis of truth than was usually to be found attached to his statements. That he should have intended to produce a false impression was a matter of course, and nearly equally so that he should have made his attempt by asserting things which he must have known that no one would believe. He was going to Germany, and he was going in company with a clergyman, and it had been decided that he should remain there for the next 12 months. A representation had lately been made to the Bishop of London that the English Protestants settled in a certain commercial town in the northeastern district of Prussia were without pastoral aid, and the bishop had stirred himself in the matter. A clergyman was found willing to expatriate himself, but the income suggested was very small. The Protestant English population of the commercial town in question, though pious, was not liberal. It had come to pass that the Morning Breakfast Table had interested itself in the matter, having appealed for subscriptions after a manner not unusual with that paper. The bishop and all those concerned in the matter had fully understood that if the Morning Breakfast Table could be got to take the matter up heartily, the thing would be done. The heartiness had been so complete that it had at last devolved upon Mr. Brown to appoint the clergyman, and, as with all the aid that could be found the income was still small, the Reverend Septimus Blake, a brand snatched from the burning of Rome, had been induced to undertake the maintenance and total charge of Sir Felix Carbury for a consideration. Mr. Brown imparted to Mr. Blake all that there was to know about the baronet, giving much counsel as to the management of the young man, and specially enjoining on the clergyman that he should on no account give Sir Felix the means of returning home. It was evidently Mr. Brown's anxious wish that Sir Felix should see as much as possible of German life at a comparatively moderate expenditure, and under circumstances that should be externally respectable, if not absolutely those which a young gentleman might choose for his own comfort or profit, but especially that those circumstances should not admit of the speedy return to England of the young gentleman himself. Lady Carbury had at first opposed the scheme. Terribly difficult as was to her the burden of maintaining her son, she could not endure the idea of driving him into exile. But Mr. Brown was very obstinate, very reasonable, and, as she thought, somewhat hard of heart. "What is to be the end of it, then?" he said to her, almost in anger. For in those days the great editor, when in presence of Lady Carbury, differed very much from that Mr. Brown who used to squeeze her hand and look into her eyes. His manner with her had become so different that she regarded him as quite another person. She hardly dared to contradict him, and found herself almost compelled to tell him what she really felt and thought. "Do you mean to let him eat up everything you have, to your last shilling, and then go to the workhouse with him?" "Oh, my friend, you know how I am struggling. Do not say such horrid things." "It is because I know how you are struggling that I find myself compelled to say anything on the subject. What hardship will there be in his living for 12 months with a clergyman in Prussia? What can he do better? What better chance can he have of being weaned from the life he is leading?" "If he could only be married!" "Married! Who is to marry him? Why should any girl with money throw herself away upon him?" "He is so handsome." "What has his beauty brought him to? Lady Carbury, you must let me tell you that all that is not only foolish but wrong. If you keep him here you will help to ruin him, and will certainly ruin yourself. He has agreed to go. Let him go." She was forced to yield. Indeed, as Sir Felix had himself assented, it was almost impossible that she should not do so. Perhaps Mr. Brown's greatest triumph was due to the talent and firmness with which he persuaded Sir Felix to start upon his travels. "Your mother," said Mr. Brown, "has made up her mind that she will not absolutely beggar your sister and herself in order that your indulgence may be prolonged for a few months. She cannot make you go to Germany, of course, but she can turn you out of her house, and unless you go she will do so." "I don't think she ever said that, Mr. Brown." "No, she has not said so, but I have said it for her in her presence, and she has acknowledged that it must necessarily be so. You may take my word as a gentleman that it will be so. If you take her advice, £175 a year will be paid for your maintenance, but if you remain in England not a shilling further will be paid." He had no money. His last sovereign was all but gone. Not a tradesman would give him credit for a coat or a pair of boots. The key of the door had been taken away from him. The very page treated him with contumely. His clothes were becoming rusty. There was no prospect of amusement for him during the coming autumn or winter. He did not anticipate much excitement in Eastern Prussia, but he thought that any change must be a change for the better. He assented, therefore, to the proposition made by Mr. Brown, was duly introduced to the Reverend Septimus Blake, and, as he spent his last sovereign on a last dinner at the Beargarden, explained his intentions for the immediate future to those friends at his club who would no doubt mourn his departure. Mr. Blake and Mr. Brown between them did not allow the grass to grow under their feet. Before the end of August, Sir Felix, with Mr. and Mrs. Blake and the young Blakes, had embarked from Hull for Hamburg, having extracted at the very hour of parting a last £5 note from his foolish mother. "It will be just enough to bring him home," said Mr. Brown, with angry energy, when he was told of this. But Lady Carbury, who knew her son well, assured him that Felix would be restrained in his expenditure by no such prudence as such a purpose would indicate. "It will be gone," she said, "long before they reach their destination." "Then why the deuce should you give it him?" said Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown's anxiety had been so intense that he had paid half a year's allowance in advance to Mr. Blake out of his own pocket. Indeed, he had paid various sums for Lady Carbury, so that that unfortunate woman would often tell herself that she was becoming subject to the great editor, almost like a slave. He came to her 3 or 4 times a week, at about 9 o'clock in the evening, and gave her instructions as to all that she should do. "I wouldn't write another novel if I were you," he said. This was hard, as the writing of novels was her great ambition, and she had flattered herself that the one novel which she had written was good. Mr. Brown's own critic had declared it to be very good in glowing language. The Evening Pulpit had of course abused it, because it is the nature of the Evening Pulpit to abuse. So she had argued with herself, telling herself that the praise was all true, whereas the censure had come from malice. After that article in the "Breakfast Table" it did seem hard that Mr. Brown should tell her to write no more novels. She looked up at him piteously, but said nothing. "I don't think you'd find it answer. Of course you can do it as well as a great many others, but then that is saying so little." "I thought I could make some money." "I don't think Mr. Leadham would hold out to you very high hopes. I don't indeed. I think I would turn to something else." "It is so very hard to get paid for what one does." To this Mr. Brown made no immediate answer, but after sitting for a while almost in silence, he took his leave. On that very morning Lady Carbury had parted from her son. She was soon about to part from her daughter, and she was very sad. She felt that she could hardly keep up that house in Welbeck Street for herself, even if her means permitted it. What should she do with herself? Whither should she take herself? Perhaps the bitterest drop in her cup had come from those words of Mr. Brown forbidding her to write more novels. After all, then, she was not a clever woman, not more clever than other women around her. That very morning she had prided herself on her coming success as a novelist, basing all her hopes on that review in the "Breakfast Table." Now, with that reaction of spirits which is so common to all of us, she was more than equally despondent. He would not thus have crushed her without a reason. Though he was hard to her now, he who used to be so soft, he was very good. It did not occur to her to rebel against him. After what he had said, of course there would be no more praise in the "Breakfast Table," and equally of course no novel of hers could succeed without that. The more she thought of him, the more omnipotent he seemed to be. The more she thought of herself, the more absolutely prostrate she seemed to have fallen from those high hopes with which she had begun her literary career not much more than 12 months ago. On the next day he did not come to her at all, and she sat idle, wretched, and alone. She could not interest herself in Hetta's coming marriage, as that marriage was in direct opposition to one of her broken schemes. She had not ventured to confess so much to Mr. Brown, but she had in truth written the first pages of the first chapter of a second novel. It was impossible now that she should even look at what she had written. All this made her very sad. She spent the evening quite alone, for Hetta was staying down in Suffolk with her cousin's friend, Mrs. Yeld, the bishop's wife, and as she thought of her life past and her life to come, she did, perhaps, with a broken light, see something of the error of her ways, and did, after a fashion, repent. It was all leather or prunello, as she said to herself. It was all vanity, and vanity, and vanity. What real enjoyment had she found in anything? She had only taught herself to believe that some day something would come which she would like, but she had never as yet in truth found anything to like. It had all been an anticipation, but now even her anticipations were at an end. Mr. Brown had sent her son away, had forbidden her to write any more novels, and had been refused when he had asked her to marry him. The next day he came to her as usual, and found her still very wretched. "I shall give up this house," she said. "I can't afford to keep it, and in truth I shall not want it. I don't in the least know where to go, but I don't think that it much signifies. Any place will be the same to me now." "I don't see why you should say that." "What does it matter?" "You wouldn't think of going out of London?" "Why not? I suppose I had better go wherever I can live cheapest." "I should be sorry that you should be settled where I could not see you," said Mr. Brown plaintively. "So shall I, very. You have been more kind to me than anybody. But what am I to do? If I stay in London I can live only in some miserable lodgings. I know you will laugh at me and tell me that I am wrong, but my idea is that I shall follow Felix wherever he goes, so that I may be near him and help him when he needs help. Hetta doesn't want me. There is nobody else that I can do any good to." "I want you," said Mr. Brown, very quietly. "Ah, that is so kind of you. There is nothing makes one so good as goodness. Nothing binds your friend to you so firmly as the acceptance from him of friendly actions. You say you want me because I have so sadly wanted you. When I go you will simply miss an almost daily trouble. But where shall I find a friend?" "When I said I wanted you I meant more than that, Lady Carbury. 2 or 3 months ago I asked you to be my wife. You declined, chiefly, if I understood you rightly, because of your son's position. That has been altered, and therefore I ask you again. I have quite convinced myself, not without some doubts, for you shall know all, but still I have quite convinced myself that such a marriage will best contribute to my own happiness. I do not think, dearest, that it would mar yours." This was said with so quiet a voice and so placid a demeanour that the words, though they were too plain to be misunderstood, hardly at first brought themselves home to her. Of course he had renewed his offer of marriage, but he had done so in a tone which almost made her feel that the proposition could not be an earnest one. It was not that she believed that he was joking with her, or paying her a poor insipid compliment. When she thought about it at all she knew that it could not be so. But the thing was so improbable. Her opinion of herself was so poor, she had become so sick of her own vanities and littlenesses and pretences, that she could not understand that such a man as this should in truth want to make her his wife. At this moment she thought less of herself and more of Mr. Brown than either perhaps deserved. She sat silent, quite unable to look him in the face, while he kept his place in his arm-chair, lounging back, with his eyes intent on her countenance. "Well," he said, "what do you think of it? I never loved you better than I did for refusing me before, because I thought that you did so because it was not right that I should be embarrassed by your son." "That was the reason," she said, almost in a whisper. "But I shall love you better still for accepting me now, if you will accept me." The long vista of her past life appeared before her eyes. The ambition of her youth, which had been taught to look only to a handsome maintenance, the cruelty of her husband which had driven her to run from him, the further cruelty of his forgiveness when she returned to him, the calumny which had made her miserable, though she had never confessed her misery, then her attempts at life in London, her literary successes and failures, and the wretchedness of her son's career, there had never been happiness or even comfort in any of it. Even when her smiles had been sweetest, her heart had been heaviest. Could it be that now at last real peace should be within her reach, and that tranquillity which comes from an anchor holding to a firm bottom? Then she remembered that first kiss, or attempted kiss, when with a sort of pride in her own superiority she had told herself that the man was a susceptible old goose. She certainly had not thought then that his susceptibility was of this nature. Nor could she quite understand now whether she had been right then, and that the man's feelings and almost his nature had since changed, or whether he had really loved her from first to last. As he remained silent, it was necessary that she should answer him. "You can hardly have thought of it enough," she said. "I have thought of it a good deal, too. I have been thinking of it for 6 months at least." "There is so much against me." "What is there against you?" "They say bad things of me in India." "I know all about that," replied Mr. Brown. "And Felix." "I think I may say that I know all about that also." "And then I have become so poor." "I am not proposing to myself to marry you for your money. Luckily for me, I hope luckily for both of us, it is not necessary that I should do so. And then I seem so to have fallen through in everything. I don't know what I've got to give to a man in return for all that you offer to give to me." "Yourself?" he said, stretching out his right hand to her. And there he sat with it stretched out, so that she found herself compelled to put her own into it, or to refuse to do so with very absolute words. Very slowly she put out her own, and gave it to him without looking at him. Then he drew her towards him, and in a moment she was kneeling at his feet, with her face buried on his knees. Considering their ages, perhaps we must say that their attitude was awkward. They would certainly have thought so themselves had they imagined that any one could have seen them. But how many absurdities of the kind are not only held to be pleasant, but almost holy, as long as they remain mysteries inspected by no profane eyes. It is not that age is ashamed of feeling passion and acknowledging it, but that the display of it is without the graces of which youth is proud and which age regrets. On that occasion there was very little more said between them. He had certainly been in earnest, and she had now accepted him. As he went down to his office he told himself now that he had done the best, not only for her but for himself also. And yet I think that she had won him more thoroughly by her former refusal than by any other virtue. She, as she sat alone late into the night, became subject to a thorough reaction of spirit. That morning the world had been a perfect blank to her. There was no single object of interest before her. Now everything was rose-coloured. This man, who had thus bound her to him, who had given her such assured proofs of his affection and truth, was one of the considerable ones of the world. A man than whom few, so she told herself, were greater or more powerful. Was it not a career enough for any woman to be the wife of such a man, to receive his friends, and to shine with his reflected glory? Whether her hopes were realized, or, as human hopes never are realized, how far her content was assured, these pages cannot tell. But they must tell that before the coming winter was over, Lady Carbury became the wife of Mr. Brown, and in furtherance of her own resolve took her husband's name. The house in Welbeck Street was kept, and Mrs. Brown's Tuesday evenings were much more regarded by the literary world than had been those of Lady Carbury. End of chapter 99. Chapter 100 of The Way We Live Now. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 100. Down in Suffolk. It need hardly be said that Paul Montague was not long in adjusting his affairs with Hetta after the visit which he received from Roger Carbury. Early on the following morning he was once more in Welbeck Street, taking the brooch with him; and though at first Lady Carbury kept up her opposition, she did it after so weak a fashion as to throw in fact very little difficulty in his way. Hetta understood perfectly that she was in this matter stronger than her mother, and that she need fear nothing now that Roger Carbury was on her side. "I don't know what you mean to live on," Lady Carbury said, threatening future evils in a plaintive tone. Hetta repeated, though in other language, the assurance which the young lady made who declared that if her future husband would consent to live on potatoes, she would be quite satisfied with the potato peelings; while Paul made some vague allusion to the satisfactory nature of his final arrangements with the house of Fisker, Montague, and Montague. "I don't see anything like an income," said Lady Carbury, "but I suppose Roger will make it right. He takes everything upon himself now, it seems." But this was before the halcyon day of Mr. Brougham's second offer. It was at any rate decided that they were to be married, and the time fixed for the marriage was to be the following spring. When this was finally arranged, Roger Carbury, who had returned to his own home, conceived the idea that it would be well that Hetta should pass the autumn, and if possible the winter also, down in Suffolk, so that she might get used to him in the capacity which he now aspired to fill. And with that object he induced Mrs. Yeld, the bishop's wife, to invite her down to the palace. Hetta accepted the invitation, and left London before she could hear the tidings of her mother's engagement with Mr. Broune. Roger Carbury had not yielded in this matter, had not brought himself to determine that he would recognize Paul and Hetta as acknowledged lovers, without a fierce inward contest. Two convictions had been strong in his mind, both of which were opposed to this recognition. The first telling him that he would be a fitter husband for the girl than Paul Montague, and the second assuring him that Paul had ill-treated him in such a fashion that forgiveness would be both foolish and unmanly. For Roger, though he was a religious man, and one anxious to conform to the spirit of Christianity, would not allow himself to think that an injury should be forgiven unless the man who did the injury repented of his own injustice. As to giving his coat to the thief who had taken his cloak, he told himself that were he and others to be guided by that precept, honest industry would go naked in order that vice and idleness might be comfortably clothed. If any one stole his cloak he would certainly put that man in prison as soon as possible, and not commence his lenience till the thief should at any rate affect to be sorry for his fault. Now, to his thinking, Paul Montague had stolen his cloak, and were he, Roger, to give way in this matter of his love, he would be giving Paul his coat also. No; he was bound after some fashion to have Paul put into prison, to bring him before a jury and to get a verdict against him, so that some sentence of punishment might be at least pronounced. How then could he yield? And Paul Montague had shown himself to be very weak in regard to women. It might be, no doubt it was true, that Mrs. Hurtle's appearance in England had been distressing to him. But still he had gone down with her to Lowestoft as her lover, and to Roger's thinking a man who could do that was quite unfit to be the husband of Hetta Carbury. He would himself tell no tales against Montague on that head. Even when pressed to do so he had told no tale. But not the less was his conviction strong that Hetta ought to know the truth, and to be induced by that knowledge to reject her younger lover. But then over these convictions there came a third, equally strong, which told him that the girl loved the younger man and did not love him, and that if he loved the girl it was his duty as a man to prove his love by doing what he could to make her happy. As he walked up and down the walk by the moat, with his hands clasped behind his back, stopping every now and again to sit on the terrace wall, walking there mile after mile with his mind intent on the one idea, he schooled himself to feel that that and that only could be his duty. What did love mean if not that? What could be the devotion which men so often affect to feel if it did not tend to self-sacrifice on behalf of the beloved one? A man would incur any danger for a woman, would subject himself to any toil, would even die for her. But if this were done simply with the object of winning her, where was that real love of which sacrifice of self on behalf of another is the truest proof? So by degrees he resolved that the thing must be done. The man, though he had been bad to his friend, was not all bad. He was one who might become good in good hands. He, Roger, was too firm of purpose and too honest of heart to buoy himself up into new hopes by assurances of the man's unfitness. What right had he to think that he could judge of that better than the girl herself? And so, when many, many miles had been walked, he succeeded in conquering his own heart, though in conquering it he crushed it, and in bringing himself to the resolve that the energies of his life should be devoted to the task of making Mrs. Paul Montague a happy woman. We have seen how he acted up to this resolve when last in London, withdrawing at any rate all signs of anger from Paul Montague, and behaving with the utmost tenderness to Hetta. When he had accomplished that task of conquering his own heart, and of assuring himself thoroughly that Hetta was to become his rival's wife, He was, I think, more at ease and less troubled in his spirit than he had been during these months in which there had still been doubt. The sort of happiness which he had once pictured to himself could certainly never be his. That he would never marry he was quite sure. Indeed, he was prepared to settle Carbury on Hetta's eldest boy on condition that such boy should take the old name. He would never have a child whom he could in truth call his own. But if he could induce these people to live at Carbury, or to live there for at least a part of the year, so that there should be some life in the place, he thought that he could awaken himself again, and again take an interest in the property. But as a first step to this he must learn to regard himself as an old man, as one who had let life pass by too far for the purposes of his own home, and who must therefore devote himself to make happy the homes of others. So thinking of himself, and so resolving, he had told much of his story to his friend the Bishop, and as a consequence of those revelations Mrs. Yeld had invited Hetta down to the palace. Roger felt that he had still much to say to his cousin before her marriage, which could be said in the country much better than in town, and he wished to teach her to regard Suffolk as the county to which she should be attached, and in which she was to find her home. The day before she came he was over at the palace with the pretence of asking permission to come and see his cousin soon after her arrival, but in truth with the idea of talking about Hetta to the only friend to whom he had looked for sympathy in his trouble. "As to settling your property on her or her children," said the Bishop, "it is quite out of the question. Your lawyer would not allow you to do it. Where would you be if after all you were to marry?" "I shall never marry." "Very likely not, but yet you may. How is a man of your age to speak with certainty of what he will do or what he will not do in that respect? You can make your will, doing as you please with your property, and the will, when made, can be revoked." "I think you hardly understand just what I feel," said Roger, "and I know very well that I am unable to explain it. But I wish to act exactly as I would do if she were my daughter, and as if her son, if she had a son, would be my natural heir." "But if she were your daughter, her son wouldn't be your natural heir, as long as there was a probability, or even a chance, that you might have a son of your own. A man should never put the power which properly belongs to him out of his own hands. If it does properly belong to you, it must be better with you than elsewhere. I think very highly of your cousin, and I have no reason to think otherwise than well of the gentleman whom she intends to marry. But it is only human nature to suppose that the fact that your property is still at your own disposal should have some effect in producing the more complete observance of your wishes." "I do not believe it in the least, my lord," said Roger, somewhat angrily. "That is because you are so carried away by enthusiasm at the present moment as to ignore the ordinary rules of life. There are not perhaps many fathers who have Regans and Gonerills for their daughters. But there are very many who may take a lesson from the folly of the old king. 'Thou hadst little wit in thy bald crown,' the fool said to him, 'when thou gavest thy golden one away.' The world, I take it, thinks that the fool was right." The Bishop did so far succeed that Roger abandoned the idea of settling his property on Paul Montague's children, but he was not on that account the less resolute in his determination to make himself and his own interests subordinate to those of his cousin. When he came over 2 days afterwards to see her, he found her in the garden, and walked there with her for a couple of hours. "I hope all our troubles are over now," he said, smiling. "You mean about Felix?" said Hetta, "and mamma?" "No, indeed. As to Felix, I think that Lady Carbury has done the best thing in her power. No doubt she has been advised by Mr. Broune, and Mr. Broune seems to be a prudent man. And about your mother herself, I hope that she may now be comfortable, but I was not alluding to Felix and your mother. I was thinking of you and of myself." "I hope that you will never have any troubles." "I have had troubles. I mean to speak very freely to you now, dear. I was nearly upset, what I suppose people call broken-hearted, when I was assured that you certainly would never become my wife. I ought not to have allowed myself to get into such a frame of mind. I should have known that I was too old to have a chance." "Oh, Roger, it was not that." "Well, that and other things. I should have known it sooner, and have got over my misery quicker. I should have been more manly and stronger. After all, though love is a wonderful incident in a man's life, it is not that only that he is here for. I have duties plainly marked out for me, and as I should never allow myself to be withdrawn from them by pleasure, so neither should I by sorrow. But it is done now. I have conquered my regrets, and I can say with safety that I look forward to your presence and Paul's presence at Carbury as the source of all my future happiness. I will make him welcome as though he were my brother, and you as though you were my daughter. All I ask of you is that you will not be chary of your presence there." She only answered him by a close pressure on his arm. "That is what I wanted to say to you. You will teach yourself to regard me as your best and closest friend, as he on whom you have the strongest right to depend of all, except your husband?" "There is no teaching necessary for that," she said. "As a daughter leans on a father, I would have you lean on me, Hetta. You will soon come to find that I am very old. I grow old quickly, and already feel myself to be removed from everything that is young and foolish." "You never were foolish." "Nor young either, I sometimes think. But now you must promise me this. You will do all that you can to induce him to make Carbury his residence." "We have no plans as yet at all, Roger." "Then it will be certainly so much the easier for you to fall into my plan. Of course you will be married at Carbury." "What will mamma say?" "She will come here, and I am sure will enjoy it. That I regard as settled. Then, after that, let this be your home, so that you should learn really to care about and to love the place. It will be your home really, you know, some of these days. You will have to be Squire of Carbury yourself when I am gone, till you have a son old enough to fill that exalted position." With all his love to her and his good will to them both, he could not bring himself to say that Paul Montague should be Squire of Carbury. "Oh, Roger, please do not talk like that." "But it is necessary, my dear. I want you to know what my wishes are, and, if it be possible, I would learn what are yours. My mind is quite made up as to my future life. Of course I do not wish to dictate to you, and if I did, I could not dictate to Mr. Montague." Pray do not call him Mr. Montague." "Well, I will not. To Paul, then. There goes the last of my anger." He threw his hands up as though he were scattering his indignation to the air. "I would not dictate either to you or to him, but it is right that you should know that I hold my property as steward for those who are to come after me, and that the satisfaction of my stewardship will be infinitely increased if I find that those for whom I act share the interest which I shall take in the matter. It is the only payment which you and he can make me for my trouble." "But Felix, Roger!" His brow became a little black as he answered her. "To a sister," he said very solemnly, "I will not say a word against her brother. But on that subject I claim a right to come to a decision on my own judgment. It is a matter in which I have thought much, and I may say suffered much. I have ideas, old-fashioned ideas, on the matter, which I need not pause to explain to you now. If we are as much together as I hope we shall be, you will, no doubt, come to understand them. The disposition of a family property, even though it be one so small as mine, is to my thinking a matter which a man should not make in accordance with his own caprices, or even with his own affections. He owes a duty to those who live on his land, and he owes a duty to his country. And though it may seem fantastic to say so, I think he owes a duty to those who have been before him, and who have manifestly wished that the property should be continued in the hands of their descendants. These things are to me very holy. In what I am doing I am in some respects departing from the theory of my life, but I do so under a perfect conviction that by the course I am taking I shall best perform the duties to which I have alluded. I do not think, Hetta, that we need say any more about that." He had spoken so seriously that though she did not quite understand all that he had said, she did not venture to dispute his will any further. He did not endeavour to exact from her any promise, but having explained his purposes, kissed her as he would have kissed a daughter, and then left her and rode home without going into the house. Soon after that Paul Montague came down to Carbury, and the same thing was said to him, though in a much less solemn manner. Paul was received quite in the old way. Having declared that he would throw all anger behind him, and that Paul should be again Paul, he rigidly kept his promise, whatever might be the cost to his own feelings. As to his love for Hetta and his old hopes, and the disappointment which had so nearly unmanned him, he said not another word to his fortunate rival. Montague knew it all, but there was now no necessity that any allusion should be made to past misfortunes. Roger indeed made a solemn resolution that to Paul he would never again speak of Hetta as the girl whom he himself had loved, though he looked forward to a time, probably many years hence, when he might perhaps remind her of his fidelity. But he spoke much of the land and of the tenants and the labourers of his own farm, of the amount of the income, and of the necessity of so living that the income might always be more than sufficient for the wants of the household. When the spring came round, Hetta and Paul were married by the bishop at the parish church of Carbury, and Roger Carbury gave away the bride. All those who saw the ceremony declared that the squire had not seemed to be so happy for many a long year. John Crumb, who was there with his wife, himself now one of Roger's tenants, having occupied the land which had become vacant by the death of old Daniel Ruggles, declared that the wedding was almost as good fun as his own. "John, what a fool you are," Ruby said to her spouse, when this opinion was expressed with rather a loud voice. "Yes, I be," said John, "but not such a fool as to amiss the having o' you." "No, John, it was I was the fool then," said Ruby. "We'll see about that when the bairn's born," said John, equally aloud. Then Ruby held her tongue. Mrs. Brown and Mr. Brown were also at Carbury, thus doing great honour to Mr. and Mrs. Paul Montague, and showing by their presence that all family feuds were at an end. Sir Felix was not there. Happily up to this time Mr. Septimus Blake had continued to keep that gentleman as one of his Protestant population in the German town, no doubt not without considerable trouble to himself. End of Chapter 100. End of The Way We Live Now, by Anthony Trollope.